Okay, so welcome everyone, thank you for joining. Sorry that it's not live, we had a few technical issues, but we hope you find this event helpful. I'm Asha and I'm a second year PPS, so I study philosophy, politics and economics, and I'm the current access rep at Hughes. So this means that I've been elected by the JCR, who's like the student body, to organise events like this to encourage wider participation. We've organised this because I know there's a lot of stereotypes about Oxford that can make it seem like a really daunting process, and we just want to show that it's not out of reach and hopefully make it seem less intimidating. So when I was applying, I wasn't really sure whether it was for me, so hopefully we can put your mind at ease and hopefully you'll learn something. So we've collected all the questions that people have submitted and we'll try to answer as many as possible. If you still have questions at the end or we've missed your question, then the Oxford University are putting on virtual open days on the 1st and 2nd of July, and there's one in September as well. So definitely check that out and make sure to go look at St. Hugh's. Also, you can contact the St. Hugh's outreach officer with any questions that you have, or leave a comment on this video if there's any specific questions that you have and we'll try and answer them. So we'll start with some questions about the application process and then answer some more general ones about student life in Oxford, and then we have some subject specific ones at the end. So the first question that we got was, do you have any knowledge about how the application process will differ for 2021 entrants due to the COVID situation? So obviously there's so much uncertainty about the process and what's going to happen due to coronavirus, but I know that they're planning to get us all back at the moment for Michaelmas term, and hopefully it will be as normal as possible. So due to this, they're not expecting lots of deferrals, but obviously the details of it all won't be confirmed until they know the situation, but they don't think it's going to affect places for when you guys will be applying. There is more information on the Oxford website. There's a whole COVID section that you can go read about any changes that are happening and stuff like that. There are also loads of questions about not being able to get work experience due to the pandemic. And the university have made it clear that it's not a requirement, you don't need to have work experience or any specific extracurricular. So honestly, don't worry about that, you're not disadvantaged. It is worth noting that they've made specific medical guidance, if you're applying for medicine, about how to get relevant work experience and information about that. So that's worth looking at. That's on the university website. But yeah, so the next question is, what is the best technique to prepare for admissions tests, and how much weight are entry exam results given in the application process? So Annie, do you want to start?
Yeah. So I took the LNAT, which is the law entrance exam, and it's not only Oxford that uses it. I think LSE, UCL and King's use it, as well as Durham possibly. So yeah, so it's quite nice, you get it all done in one go. I used a book by Mark Shepherd. It's quite pricey, it's about £20, but it's a lot cheaper than tutoring, and I found it really helpful. It didn't actually improve my score much, but it gave me a lot of confidence, I think, for the day. The LNAT, in case you don't know, it's online and you take it where you normally take your driver's license kind of mock test. So mine was right next to an IKEA. I got to eat some cake before I went in. And yeah, it's super chill. It's 2 hours long. There's lots of multiple choice questions and then an essay at the end. And I think just don't stress. I forgot to delete my plan from my essay and I still got in. So it should be fine.
So I did the TSA, the thinking skills assessment. So I did chemistry, so I did the first half of that, and then for some other subjects, we also did the second half. So the first part, I think probably the most, and they can basically do the TSA and and so working your way through those basically just the best way to do it. It's not necessary. I found wider reading on thinking to do it quite useful. And so, for example, the today I find quite useful. Just giving me good context.
Hi, I'm Jacob. I do medicine. So for Oxford, the exam for medicine is BMAT, and that's also the same for UCL, Imperial, Leeds, a couple of others. And it's done on paper, whereas there's the UK CAT as well, which is for other unis, like pretty much every other uni, and that's like a driving test theory. It's done on the computer and stuff like that. So with the BMAT, I wouldn't recommend at all any of these like prep courses that you have to pay for. There's like so many past papers. There's like 20 of them, and you won't run out. All I'd say is just do those past papers and do them under time conditions. So even if you just have an alarm when your time's up, and at the start your time will be up before you finish, but then like you can just do the rest of the paper, but just know how far you got before your time ran out. That's really helpful. And then the other thing is that for the science section, most people obviously applying to medicine don't do all of biology, chemistry, and physics. They'll be missing one of them. And then you can sometimes get a bit worried about the one that you're missing. But there's this guy, Ali Abdal. He's actually a qualified doctor now, but when I was applying, he was a student. But he has this set of videos that basically just teach it, like just lessons on the science. And I definitely recommend them. You normally have to pay for them, but if you get in touch with him, if you need the help, he can give it price-wise. And then for the UK CAT, what I would recommend is this website called Medify, which is pretty expensive, but it is so good, because the format of the UK CAT is like on the computers, like with the driving theory, and Medify uses that same format, and all the shortcuts and stuff around the website are really helpful because you also run out of time on that. So it is expensive, but again, there's so many questions on it that you can kind of like share your subscription with someone else, because between two of you or even more people, you're not going to run out of questions. So I definitely recommend that.
Yeah, I mean, I did the TSA, which is the same as Joe. So like, I guess the first thing that is worth noting is that, me and Joe obviously do like very different subjects, and I think it's important for you to realise that like a lot of the questions that come won't necessarily like fit your specific skill set. So like, if you can just do your best, like stay relaxed, and like it made me laugh actually when Jacob said there that like when you start doing the past papers you won't finish it in time, because I mean I didn't finish the actual TSA in time. So like it's something like you go in and just don't really be fazed by doing anything wrong. It's also really important, I think, like the other guys have said, to do past papers, because I think the uni website, for example, says that like the TSAs and similar tests are kind of revision proof, and like once you've done 3 past papers, that's you like done as much as you need. And I took that at like face value, and I think when you arrive, you realise quite quickly that there is a benefit to doing as many past papers as you can, even if it's just comfort and stuff like that. So obviously like your schoolwork comes first, but I would say do as many past papers as is possible. In terms of like that second part of your question, how much weighting it gets, that's probably something that varies unfortunately between different colleges and different tutors. My understanding, I think for PPE at least, is that you tend to need a certain level of performance to get an interview. But once you're at interview stage, it's not really a massive factor in whether you get in like from that stage onwards. Certainly some of the people in my cohort have excellent TSA scores and some have less excellent TSA scores. So it's just it's one of the stages that you need to get through, but I wouldn't I wouldn't be too worried if it's not your forte.
Okay, so the next question is there any importance given to whether a subject at A level is considered a soft subject or a hard subject, or is it just the grade that matters?
I think I put myself down to answer the question. I remember when I was applying, the LSE had a list of soft and hard subjects, kind of subjects they like less. I don't think you have to follow that super strictly, but it was something that I kept in mind and I found quite helpful when I was taking my A-levels, just to make sure that I was doing at least one essay subject if I was applying for essay-based degree, and making sure that I got the right combination of subjects to do what I wanted to do, I guess. Like if you want to do maths, I think you need to make sure that you're taking further maths and stuff. But other than that, I don't think it's a massive consideration, particularly if you're taking 4 A levels.
Okay, so
Can I just jump in?
oh yeah, sure.
Can I just jump in? I think like a really important thing to note about the kind of subject you do is there is a massive difference between degrees that typically are offered at A level and aren't. So if you're going to study something like classics and you don't necessarily have a background in classics but you're really passionate about it, then having subjects like, I don't know, a hard subject like history, but then a softer subject like politics, it's like, you know, the skills are still going to be transferable, you know. So it's kind of like, I would say for me personally, it wasn't about considering what's kind of like hard and soft. It's more about what's going to give you transferable skills. Like, again, for me personally, I do history and English, and I did psychology at A level, and I found that really, really useful, because I feel like a lot of the information is transferable. So yeah, that I would really consider what is transferable rather than what is seen as like more difficult or more easy in that like hard and soft kind of categorization.
Yeah, definitely. So how important are GCSE grades when applying to Oxford?
Yeah, so I think I'm still talking for this one. So yeah, I'm Ollie. I do history and English. I've just finished my first year, and yeah, so I applied to Oxford twice. I got rejected once, which makes me basically like a walking meme. But so I applied for straight history the first time, and they gave me, I applied to St. Anne's, and they gave me an incredible kind of feedback booklet, and it was kind of like 10 pages long, and it had a lot of information on there that I think you pretty much can't access elsewhere. And it was talking about the relative weightings of the different parts of your application. And it said on there that for history specifically, and I think that the same is true of all humanities subjects, your GCSEs make up, or your equivalent, make up 25%. So you get what's called, it's called a contextualized score. So they take the top 8 of your top 8 GCSEs, and they give you a numerical mark, which when it was us, it was like A's and A stars would translate to like 8s and 9s and things. But now obviously they have the numerical system already, so presumably it is already numerical. So they just take your top 8 GCSEs and they give you an overall mark for that, and that makes up 25%. And then the other then of 10 for, and you get an average mark based on the number of interviews that you have, 25% for your exam. And then also, and this is what's really overlooked, they also give you a score for your written essays that you submit to them. So a lot of people, and I mean, this is kind of crossing over with another question I'll answer later about the differences in being from a less financially advantageous background. And something that they don't tell you, and like they definitely didn't tell me the first time round at a state school, is your written work is marked, basically, because they said to me, your written work is part of the interview process and it will be a starting point for a conversation in an interview, which can be true, but they also give you a mark. So it is really important that you just really think about the work that you want to submit to them, because I mean, I'm not going to say to you, you know, doctor the essay, because I know that's not allowed, but just really think about the essays that you send them, because it does want to be your best work, rather than, like I was advised initially, to send them work that was maybe I thought was imperfect, because then I could in the interview talk to them about how I would improve it and change it. But I would really just try and send them what you think is kind of like your best work, because it will be given a numerical mark, which will be 25% of your overall score, that will put you in a ranking for kind of like the top 200 people or the top 20 people or however many people are in Europe applying for your degree, and then you'll be sorted through from that. So I guess, yeah, kind of in conclusion, 25% is the GCSEs or equivalent.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's worth saying that that's something that will different across
Yeah.
subjects and potentially colleges. But I think like there's a lot of things in what Ollie's just said that like I'd like to echo. I think the idea that sometimes the information you're getting given from just like the uni website or such like isn't perfect or doesn't explain things as well as it could, I think is like a recurring theme. So like the resources that Asha will put in the description of the video, and you know, St Hugh's College website will give you you know, contact details. So if you're ever in doubt about whether something's reliable or something seems a bit off, you know, I would advise asking someone if you can. I think I you know, I didn't do GCSEs coming from Scotland, but I was quite surprised at like the significance that they seemed to have for GCSE equivalents. So I went to one of the open days and spoke to the person who ended up being my tutor just now, and he was certainly more interested in my GCSE equivalents than my Scottish Highers, which are sort of halfway between GCSE and A level. And the view was that if you've done quite well in your GCSEs, that shows the sort of adaptability and transferable skills that we were talking about earlier, rather than I guess it, you know, A levels and Scottish Advanced Highers can show specialist knowledge to a greater degree. I think like what it is really important to, you know, state though is that a lot of guys watching this video, you'll probably have already done your GCSEs, and you know, the thing is preferences vary between colleges and tutors. Like I don't think it's worth stressing a huge amount you know, about like things you could have done better, etc. at GCSE level. But yeah, it's important, I guess, for you to know that there's that emphasis on sort of adaptability and transferable skills, you know, rather than necessarily whatever you've picked at your like final stage of study.
Yeah, and I think that a point that I guess I'd get from what Joe was just saying about the Scottish Highers, but in my case A levels, is they don't really care about your predicted grade. I remember I was really worried about the predicted grades that my teachers were going to give me, and I basically like begged my teachers to give me A-star predicted grades because I thought that that would be really important. But as long as your predicted grade meets the offer, meets the minimum requirement for the offer, that's all they care about. They won't take you, you know, more seriously if you've got 2 A-stars predicted, or if you've got A's or A's and B's, whatever your offer is.
Yeah, definitely. Just on that, there was also another question saying that isn't it just for people who get A-stars? And like as Ollie said, you don't need A-stars. Like I just reached the minimum requirement. I got 3 A's at A level. Like I reached the requirement. I didn't get maximum, but as long as you've got that requirement, then it really doesn't matter. So the next question was, what is the best way to prepare for interviews, and is there any tips? So for this, I'd just say like it's really cringe, but like honestly just don't stress about it. Like whilst you're there, you'll probably have multiple interviews, or obviously they might be online, we're not sure what's happening, but after you've had one interview, if you don't think that's gone very well, don't dwell on it and let that affect your performance in the second interview. And even after they're all done, like you've done the best you can, there's no point dwelling on it and worrying yourself about it. Like I thought mine had all gone awful, but they clearly mustn't have because they still got in. So like it is really hard to tell, so don't try and judge it. In terms of the actual interviews, like I don't know if it's different for sciences, but certainly for humanities, they're literally not testing your knowledge. They're just testing you to see that you can form an argument and like critically engage with them in a discussion, because it's kind of like the interview setup is like a tutorial would be. So like for philosophy, we were given a text to read beforehand, and I'd never studied it before. I didn't recognize any of the philosophers, like the content was all new, and that literally didn't matter because they just wanted to see that like you could have an interesting discussion on it. So like honestly, don't worry if your school doesn't offer like interview prep like some other schools might do. You're not disadvantaged by that because they are just looking for you to be passionate and like show that you can like critically engage with any material that they present to you. I would say it's worth reading through your personal statement beforehand and ensuring that like if you've mentioned a book or work experience that you've done or anything, make sure you have an opinion or some sort of information on it, because they might ask you about that. Like, I got asked about things I'd written in my personal statement. So it's definitely worth rereading that beforehand and making sure you haven't just mentioned a book that you haven't actually read.
And so then, from the perspective of science, I think for me the most important thing really is to think out loud. This is generally gets told any time you're getting into it, just really good. It kind of makes me feel a bit silly because you're not used to talking out loud before you're used to it in your head. But from the point of view of an Oxford interview, they're not necessarily that bothered by whether you actually get the answer. It's more about the sort of approach that you take in trying to figure out how to answer the question. So, and they often can't tell what your mind is doing while you're thinking about questions. It's worth cracking that and speaking out loud as they think about it. To give them the idea that you are actually thinking properly about the question. And as Asha said, in terms of not fixating too much on making a mistake, it's worth to keeping in mind that the tutors that you do your interviews with, you have sort of tens or hundreds of interviews. So any sort of tiny mistake that you make, they're not fixated too much. And in terms of science, there is a little bit of so we can notice that so it's not knowledge. And that is similar to science, but there's a little bit of knowledge involved. You don't need to be sort of quite sort of secure on your area of knowledge, because the questions will go through.
Can I just add in as well? For medicine, you get interviewed at 2 colleges, the one you applied to and another random one, and they literally don't speak to each other unless they both want you. So you could have an absolute nightmare at one, and once you get to the other one, it doesn't affect anything. So if you do have a nightmare at your first interview or your second or your first, don't worry about it.
Can I also just add in one quick thing about languages? I was really worried, so I'm a second year, I'm doing history and French, and before my interviews I was really worried about whether it was going to be in French, but the interview is actually for languages. It will be primarily in English and then just a little bit in the target language just to check that you can speak it, but it's really not stressful. It was more sort of, what's your name? Really not highly demanding. So don't stress too much about that.
Can I just say, for interviews, I think that it's really easy to hear all the kind of horror stories about people being asked crazy questions or basically being insulted by the tutors and things. And I will just say that generally that doesn't happen. But you have to consider, when I think about it in a really reductionist way, I think, right, well, they can ask me about my personal statement, they can ask me about the essays I've submitted, the exam that we've done, and you can prepare for all 3 of those things because you can know about them. And then the 4th thing they can ask you about is some sort of new information that they introduce during or just before the interview. So really, you can prepare for kind of those first 3 aspects and just making sure that you're knowledgeable. But I think it was Asha that was saying it's not about your knowledge, it's about the way that you think. And as long as you know a bit about what you've said you know about, then it's fine, because it's quite likely that they will give you some sort of new information to think about. And I know that when I was at interviews, a lot of people were saying teachers had given them specific ways of analysing a poem or a source. And I really don't think that you should think about it in that kind of structured way. I think that they just want to see what you instinctively have to say about it. So I'd say you can only do so much, and that's having your own knowledge, but it's kind of your innate ability to talk about something that, is kind of the reason that you're applying, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, thinking out loud is so key in that, if you're making mistakes and that sort of thing, it's not really something to be embarrassed by. And a lot of the time that can actually, be advantageous, because that sort of thought process of you realizing you're wrong and fixing it, or just demonstrating your sort of critical engagement with whatever the material is exactly what they're looking for. They're actually not expecting or particularly interested in people who turn up and can answer all of their questions. Because if that was the case, it's actually very difficult for them to see what you'd be like in a tutorial where inevitably you wouldn't be able to answer a lot of the stuff that you're talking about. So yeah, it's just it's something, whereas like cringy and cliche as it sounds, you just need to sort of go in and try and treat it in as casual and relaxed a way as you would if you were talking to like a class teacher or something like that.
Yeah, I think sorry, not to kind of like love the sound of my own voice too much, but I think that they know that you don't know the answer, right? Like they ask you questions knowing that you don't know the answer. They just want to they want you to just think about the way they kind of want you to, they don't want you to get from A to B. They just want you to like try and attempt something basically. And you'll say things that are wrong. You just will. But they know that you're going to be wrong, and they're not looking for you to be right. They're just looking for you to, I guess, just try and inject something into it.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I just want to add on to what Ollie was saying. Like, that's especially true for law, because there's no chance you know what the statutes are, what the case law is. I know I didn't, but I was still expected. So I had a pre-reading where I read a case beforehand, and my interviews were basically just primarily orientated around the case. And I never read a case, and I didn't really know anything about law. But that was kind of besides the point. Like, I think the point everyone's trying to get across is it's how you think of it, and it's how you tackle their questions, as opposed to the knowledge that you already have.
Yeah. Okay, so next question. What sort of things do admission tutors look for in personal statements?
Hi, I'm Letitia and I'm a second year biochemist. So I think that personal statements are really restricted in terms of you don't have very many like characters to fit everything you want in. So what they're really looking for is why you love the subject. So they want people who love the subject, but I think the trap a lot of people fall into is saying, I love my subject because I think it's interesting, but they don't really care about that. They want to know, so you love the subject, and then they want to see what you've done because of your love of the subject. So even if it's not true, I think it's good to exaggerate. For example, you'd say that you really love a specific topic which you've learned about in school. So I do biochemistry, which I didn't study in school. I did biology and chemistry in school. So for example, you'd say that you love learning about DNA. So because of that, you then picked up a book and read this book. So that's how you sort of structure it. You choose a topic which you like, and then you say what you've done because you like it. And that works quite well. If, for example, if you've done work experience, you can say that you found this subject interesting and you also did work experience, and you kind of link things together like that. But it doesn't even have to be work experience. It can be like, there's so much free things you can do. For example, looking things up online, listening to podcasts, reading books. There's like free books online. I think a lot of subjects have like suggested reading for people who want to apply, and that's also good because then you can figure out if you really like the subject or not, because you might not know if you've never studied it before. So yeah, they're really looking for your passion for the subject and why, like what you've done in order to back up your claims, because it's easy to just say it.
So I'm a second year PPEist, so I'll sort of talk about what you might put in like a humanities personal statement. And so for PPE, the way I did it was I sort of had like a little intro that I tried to sort of make engaging, but like don't worry about what you write as your opening sentence. I feel like lots of people tend to also get quite caught up in that, like trying to have a punchy opening. So I wouldn't get too caught up in that. But the way, like a nice way to do it for PP would be to maybe have a paragraph for each subject, just sort of to have a slightly more structure. Might make things more manageable. So like one for philosophy, one for politics, one for economics, and then dotted throughout you can sort of have the stuff you've done, So like Letitia mentioned, podcasts, you get lots of free ones on BBC Sounds, for example. And it's nice just saying, oh, I listened to this and I found this really interesting. Then I read this book. And also, as Asha mentioned earlier, it's very important to actually know enough stuff about the book so you can speak about it in the interview. And actually, if you use any key terms, make sure you can define them. I remember in my interview, I was actually asked to define one of the fancy words that I used. So that's definitely worth doing. And also just like, you know, make sure your punctuation and your grammar and your spellings are okay, which is something that, you know, you might get caught up, like, yeah. And then at the very end, because you don't really have much space in a personal statement, you can add in like any work experience you've done, but it doesn't have to be related. Like if you've volunteered in a charity shop, for example, you can mention that. Or if you had like a summer job, you can mention that. Even if you did DV, just like a little sentence, sort of make sure that you sort of show that you have other interests as well. It doesn't have to be all academic, because they're sort of conscious that you also have a life outside of work.
Can I just add in, I think Oxford is a bit less interested in those kind of extracurricular activities than a lot of other universities. Like I went to some other university open days and they were saying like a third of your personal statement can be about D of E. And I think for Oxford, it's really, that's not the focus. And no other university is going to penalise you for talking more about the subject that you want to study and just adding in those extracurricular activities at the end.
Yeah, okay, so for subjects where it's hard to get work experience, how can you show your experience and enthusiasm in a subject other than further reading?
Right, I think this is me as well. I know it's really hard to get work experience for law. I know I was really worried when I was 17 because I wanted to be a set designer for theatres up until that point. So all my work experience was at theatres and arts related. And I just felt that I couldn't put that into my personal statement. So what I did in the end was I went and sat in court, all courts in England except the family law courts, because of like the child related cases that they deal with are like free to go sit in. You can get like a really cheap return down to London if you're lucky enough to live within commuting distance of London and just sit in a court for a day. If you're not near London, like the High Court or the Old Bailey or the Supreme Court, I went to the Supreme Court and sat in on a case about pirates, which was really cool. But if you're not near London, you can go to a local Crown Court or Magistrates Court, just email in advance and they'll normally let you sit in and listen to a case. Then you can write about that in your personal statement. That's more than okay.
Just listen to podcasts. Honestly, just listen to podcasts, like just listen to one every week, you know, and you're not going to get a deep level of understanding from something, but you can just mention the podcast or kind of like the YouTube video or the documentary. You can just mention that you've seen it or you've kind of paid attention, and it just shows that you're interested, because that's all they really want. Like we've said already, they don't want you to be an expert or to be really knowledgeable. They just want you to be interested and, I guess, interesting.
Yeah, okay, so does doing 4 A-levels give you a better chance of receiving an offer?
So I did 3 A-levels, and a lot of the requirements are always just 3 A-levels. So I think, well, it definitely doesn't give you a worse chance of getting in if you do 4 A-levels, but I would say do it if you want to, not because you think it would give you an advantage, because it doesn't. So as long as you meet your grades, you'll get in. So if you spread yourself too thin, for example, I know I only just got my offer, so if I'd done an extra A-level, I definitely wouldn't have got in. So just bear that in mind. But I think if there's a subject which you really enjoy, or if you think that it will be helpful for your course, for example, like Jacob was saying, not everyone does all 3 sciences for medicine, and in my case biochemistry. I did biochemistry, I did biology, chemistry, maths, but if you do physics as well, that could be kind of helpful.
So yeah, if you want to, you do 4, but I definitely consider doing 3 if you're uncertain.
Oh, sorry.
Go on.
To add from like the Scottish perspective, most people do 5 hires, some people do 6, 7, but they know that not many schools offer like the ability to do a 6th or 7th hire, and the same with advanced hires. So our offer is based on advanced hires, and they're aware that a lot of high schools actually don't offer more than 2 advanced hires per student, so they take that into account when thinking about the offers. So yeah, if you do a few extra advanced hires, if you want to do them and you're capable of doing them, go for it. But it's not, like Letitia said, it's not that, oh, I need to do an extra advanced hire or higher A-level or whatever to get into the uni.
Can I also say, oh, sorry.
No, go on.
So my offer was an A-star and 2 A's. I did 3 A-levels, and one of my friends was doing 4 A-levels, and her offer was literally A-star, 2 A's, and you're allowed to flunk 1, as long as it's not chemistry, because that's the required subject. Like, there is no difference for medicine and for most sciences and probably most other subjects too.
Yeah, so like most people don't actually do 4 A-levels. So I actually did 4, but none of them were related to PP. Like 2 of them were maths, 1 of them was science, 1 of them was English, and English was the only one that was relevant. So you really don't need to do 4. Most people haven't done them. I'd say only do 4 if, as everyone else said, like you're really interested in something and you just enjoy it, but like don't think you have to do it. And also, if the workload is too much, it's far better to do 3, get really good grades, actually enjoy what you're studying instead of like, you know, trying to cram in terms of time and stress. So that's all I'd really add.
Okay, so why did you choose Oxford over Cambridge or any other university?
So for medicine, Cambridge interview more people than Oxford. So what that means is they're less selective to the point of an interview. So they're less selective based on your grades, based on your GCSEs, based on your scores and your tests. And then you're having to impress, you know, from a wider group of people taking interviews. So it depends on who you are, whether that system is going to suit you better in Oxford or Cambridge. For me, that was Oxford. So I applied to Oxford. But it's also worth realising between Oxford and Cambridge Medicine that Cambridge's offer can sometimes be a bit higher. So Oxford's is the standard offer is A-star AA, and Cambridge it's A-star A, and occasionally 3 A-stars, but occasionally. So if that's something that you're worried about, then obviously know that. But that said, it's also important to not just be too tactical about it. Obviously, if you're in a position where you're not really sure between the two, then you can afford to be tactical, but you are going to be going to that uni if you get in. Like for me, 6 years between the two. For other courses, less time. So like you should apply to the one that you can see yourself going to more, because that is the most important thing. And then with the same kind of question with the other unis. So again, linking to the UK CAT and BMAT that I spoke about before, different unis want you to do UK CAT or BMAT, and they look at the two. Every uni will look at one, not the other. But it's because the exams are quite different. Your scores can be quite different between the two, and your UK CAT score you'll get before you apply, your BMAT one you won't. So it depends on your score in your UK CAT, and also just generally how you feel you're going to do in the two, which you'll obviously get a feel of by practicing for them. That should affect for medicine where you apply. And on that point as well, it's good to like spread your applications out. So I applied to 2 BMAT unis, 2 UK CAT unis, and my UK CAT unis, they looked at the UK CAT quite differently to each other. And obviously, you don't want to get too lost in the tactics, and you want to apply to places you can actually see yourself going to. But it is worth applying to a range of application processes, because that just gives you the best possible chance. It's different for a lot of other courses where you're less likely to just not get an offer, whereas for medicine that happens to people much more often than other courses. So for medicine, you do want to apply to a range of application processes, because that gives you the best chance of getting in.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of why I chose Oxford over Cambridge. Like, as someone who like went to a Scottish state school and had no real exposure to either of the colleges, I suppose it's just sort of small things that end up making a bit of a difference. You know, I do PPE and it's not offered at Cambridge, and I think that's something that is apparent in quite a few subjects, in that, you know, you'd expect a similar level of teaching, and there are subjects that have like similar topics that they cover, but between the two universities there tends to be slight differences in focus, and so if there are areas that you're particularly interested in, it's worth paying quite close attention to what the different courses offer. You know, I think, as far as I understand, for example, Oxford do economics and management as opposed to straight economics, and you know, that can make quite an important difference to you know, the experience that you have over the course of 3 years. You know, as well as that, it's worth noting that the unis like have different strengths. So like for me, I think with just having a bit of a competitive streak, I think Oxford was just the better university in terms of like some subjects, and so that obviously is an incentive for, you know, I guess people with certain mindsets. And this is sort of a small point and like something that was just my personal thinking, but I think like the higher grade requirements at Cambridge, and you know, you see similar things in some of the London universities as well, suggested that in the admissions process, Cambridge is maybe looking for like a slightly different type of person. Oxford, you know, if there's less emphasis on sort of critical thinking and like personal skills that come across in interviews, I felt like, you know, for the type of learner that I was and the type of sort of social life that I was looking for, it would maybe make more sense for me to go somewhere where there wasn't such a huge emphasis on academic success at school, and there was more a view on, you know, there was more leeway for people who were able to engage in tutorials and stuff like that. You know, I think like I wouldn't want to spend too much time justifying like why you would go to Oxford as opposed to just, you know, any other university. I guess, you know, there are a couple of like standout points in terms of like the outcomes that you get. It was like, for me, like a chance to get away from home, but like more than that, I think the college system that you get in Oxbridge generally is really helpful in terms of allowing you to integrate, like the fact you're mixing not just with people who are doing your subject, but with people who've got like a whole range of backgrounds, and more importantly, you know, a whole range of interests and expertise as they progress through the course. Really, I think, you know, broadens your horizons and provides you with experiences that you might not get if you were at a university where the focus was more on sort of insular, you know, subject groups. And the tutorial system you get at Oxbridge, it really does make a difference. You know, when I talk to my mates from home about what they do over a term and the amount of support they get, like I think we really do benefit from having genuinely world-leading experts taking, you know, a few hours a week to just read over your stuff and tell you what you've got wrong. And it's, you know, it's something that I feel like we genuinely do make a lot of progress, like, you know, intellectually, I guess you would say, that you might miss out on if you were somewhere else.
Just on the back of that, like in my first year, all of my tutorials were just me and the tutor. And I'm not saying it's always one-on-one, but the numbers of people in your tutorials is very different to most other universities, where it's usually like there'll be over 10 people or something in all of your classes, whereas at Oxford it's a lot smaller, and so your tutors can help you out on a much more personal level, and they're a bit more invested in how you do in your work.
Okay, so next question is, how important is the choice of college for your university experience, and how did you choose which college to apply to?
So the first thing I'd say is you kind of need to strike a balance between, okay, maybe being a bit interested in college choice, and on the other hand, don't get too pinned down into one, because you're not guaranteed what college you get. So if you specify on your UCAS form that I want this particular college, you can't say for definitively, even if after you get an offer, that you will go to that college. There is reallocation at the interview process, and again, reallocation when you get your offers in August. But saying that, I had actually never been to Oxford before I applied, and the collegiate system was completely new to me, but I wish I'd kind of spent more time looking at the type of college I liked. Obviously this is harder when you haven't been there in person. And I was lucky to get a college that I really liked, but if I was to give advice to my 17, 16-year-old self, I would say go and look at the kind of tables that they give you on the website. So things like college size, location, subject, gardens, like all these different factors that play in. And that will kind of help you pick a college that you like. And if you really don't care and you really don't want to pick, you can just make an open application. Yeah. Oh, and sorry, how did I choose what college to apply to? Well, since I hadn't been and I had no real reason for picking one college over the other, but at the same time I felt that if I was given a choice I should use it. So I kind of based it literally based on which colleges looked the prettiest on Google Images. I just Googled this college, that college. St Hugh's is one of the ones I thought they were really pretty, because obviously I didn't have in my head what a typical Oxford college looks like. When I came here, I found out that most people don't find Hughes really attractive, as I do, because it's not a typical Oxford college, but I guess it just goes to show that it's really dependent on your taste. And also the principal at St Hugh's College, she's from the legal background, so that was kind of an influencing decision for why I picked it. She's also from Glasgow as well, so I kind of felt compelled to apply to St Hugh's.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think I would just want to echo what Zainab said. There's sorts of lots of different things that slightly change, I guess, the experience you have at different colleges, but I would hope, I think that's, it's probably not going to make or break your experience. If you want more information, the Student Union have quite a good website where if you type in something like, Oxford Student Union College Suggester, it's that, that sort of like BuzzFeed quiz format where you put in the type of person you are and they'll make suggestions for you. Things like the location next to your faculty and stuff like that are all helpful to know. In terms of how I came to the decision to apply to St Hugh's as I did in the end, I was fortunate enough to, having never been to Oxford before, visit on an open day. And that gave you the chance to sort of get a feel for aspects of college life that are quite hard to quantify, on a website or just looking, through Google Images, I suppose. And it's the sort of thing where, at Hughes, I think we benefit immensely from having quite a welcoming atmosphere, and it's very relaxed. It's always sort of a weird example, I think, and for someone who didn't study at Oxford, I didn't really get the significance of this. It was impressed upon me at the open day that at St Hugh's you can walk in the grass, and like every other college you're not allowed to do that. And it's sort of this weird Oxfordism that's important, but it does, that attitude, I think, is something that permeates through the whole college, and that some colleges, St Hugh's in particular, tend to be a bit more relaxed and have a huge focus on your extracurricular and your social life and those sorts of opportunities. I mean, we're really lucky to have an amazing ENTS team, which Claudia is part of, an amazing welfare team, peer supporters that Ollie gets involved in, and so I think if you can, it's maybe worth asking people their experiences and trying to find out a bit more about the sort of atmosphere and life that you get at different colleges. Certainly I have no regrets about going to St Hugh's.
Yeah, I think the key takeaway though is that it doesn't matter. If you have your heart set on one and you're reallocated, chances are you will end up loving that college anyway. I didn't apply to Hughes and I literally love it now. So just don't stress about it too much. It really isn't make or break. So the next question is, does coming from a financially disadvantaged family impact your chances of getting in?
So I guess it's kind of difficult to answer this question, right? Because there's a lot of stigma about wealth at Oxford. And for me, I remember I was really intimidated, coming from a state school and, not being from a well-off family. And like I said, I applied twice, and what I found the first time around was that I didn't get any help from my school. because they didn't really have a lot of people that applied to Oxbridge, and they were kind of prioritizing, you know, the whole year group. And since it was me and just one other person that were applying, I found that like the system, they didn't really know a lot about the system, and they didn't really know how to help me. So I'd say that in reality, that is the difference. I don't think like they don't look at what school you're from and be like, oh, this school's better, or they're from a better background, or anything like that. Like, they don't discriminate based on it. But the difference is the level of experienced, I guess, appliers that you have access to. So my kind of advice to combat that, and what I found the second time around, because the first time I relied really heavily on the school, but I didn't really recognize that because it's not very I didn't really recognize that because it's a state school, they you know, they didn't really know what advice to give me. So like I didn't really get to practice, and I didn't really get to understand, I guess, like interview kind of technique, or kind of like exam technique, things like that. So what I will say is, if you are in a similar situation, you can find those techniques, you can find advice, people to advise you. Like, you can get in contact with any of us, or I think Asher already said, like, if you go on the JCR website, you can contact some other people like Asher or Jerry or anyone on any of the JCR committee, and people will help you out. I'd say just like really reach out. And the difference is that if you are from a financially advantageous background, there'll be less onus on you to do the research and to do the preparation, because the reality is more of it will get given to you, or like you'll maybe be in a situation where you'll get better advice, or more, you'll just have more access to those kinds of systems and advice. But if you don't have that access, just know that it's out there. And you know, if you're not in a school that will prepare you specifically for the application process, which is why at the end of the day we have quite a significantly high proportion of private school students compared to other universities, which I actually think is changing quite quickly. But I think like the reason is because they know the application process. So yeah, like all that information is available to you online and elsewhere, even if you don't need to, even if you're not going to pay for tuition and things like that. So yeah, that's the difference, I'd say.
Yeah, so the admission statistics have been released quite recently. So if you're interested into looking into those, they're all available online. All you have to is to type in just Oxford Admission Stats 2020, and they have been improving year on year. Obviously, they're not as good as they could be, but they are getting better progressively. And also something that I would add is that once you're here, there is a lot of support, like financial support. You get loads. So if your family income is below 27,500, I think, they offer you like the chance to take on a massive scholarship that's like over £4,000, and they like help with your tuition fees and stuff. So one thing that I would add is that they obviously are trying to help people from disadvantaged backgrounds, not just state school, but like also people from, you know, financially disadvantaged backgrounds. So I would definitely look into all of the bursaries that they have available, and like don't worry about money matters ever discouraging you from applying. And also once you're here, my personal experience has been that like you don't feel ostracized or anything, like no one judges you or anything like that. And also this bursary for people who are financially disadvantaged offers lots of different support in terms of like internships and stuff that are exclusive to you, and like you can email them and stuff. So they are making like a conscious effort to encourage people to apply. So that shouldn't hopefully be too negative.
Yeah, so I think it is worth noting that, whilst, as Ollie said, like it might be more difficult if your school doesn't have all these opportunities, all these practice tests and things like that. Like, I'm pretty sure all, if not at least most of us here, went to a state school. Like, whilst it may have been slightly more work, like, it's not impossible. And like, once you're here, as Claudia said, like, it is completely fine, and no one will even like bat an eyelid at the fact that you're from a state school. It really doesn't matter. So now we have some like more general questions about like student life. So someone asked, what's the relationship like between students and faculty, and how often do they meet?
Yeah, I mean, this is quite a good question for highlighting some of the differences between Oxford and I think other university experiences. So as anywhere else, the faculty provides your lectures and your exams, and as you progress through your degree and try to find more specialised modules and things like that, faculty will make sure that the tutors you have are experts in those specific fields. So you're not tied to in-college tutors that maybe have less knowledge of that area. However, like most of your contact, I think, particularly as a humanities or social science student, doesn't come from the faculty. It comes from sort of in-college learning. So your tutorials and your classes are all handled by the college tutors, at least in the first year, PPE at least. And the academic and pastoral support, if you start to struggle or have any questions, which in my experience is excellent, all come from your personal tutors rather than the sort of overarching body that provides the course as a whole. So you tend to have contact multiple times a week with tutors who work within the faculty, but it's more a sort of like in-house college relationship as your primary way of learning. Though I think that might vary slightly for the sciences, as I'm sure Letitia will highlight.
Yeah, so it does vary, I think, for most of the science subjects, if not all of them. So you've got your department, which does the lectures and the exams, and then you have your tutors who live in the college and will give you classes and tutorials in the college, but they'll also be part of the department. So a lot of the times you'll get, it's like one of your lecturers will be your personal tutor. So as a scientist, you have a couple of lectures per day plus a couple of tutorials per week, depending on what subject you do. So I'd say it's like, it depends, if you want to go to lectures or not, but you do get a lot more contact with your department if you're a science student because of the lectures and because the lectures are the bulk of your learning, but your deadlines will come from your tutors. So for example, my tutor is a tutor in metabolism. So my tutorials are about like human metabolism, whereas if I went to a different college, they'd be about a different subject, for example, genetics in first year, but they sort of average it out. So in second year, you then have tutors from different subjects. So essentially everyone gets the same teaching no matter what college you go to, but the faculty is where you'll get most of your learning, but the more personal classes you get are from your tutors. And scientists will also have labs. So that's like your whole year will come together and go to labs. And yeah, you'll do lab work, and that's completely like department based. So I think scientists definitely get a lot more contact with the department than humanities students.
Okay, so what are the pros and cons of studying a joint honours degree?
Yeah, you go, Emily.
Okay, so the main advantage of doing like joint schools is if you're interested in several subjects or you're indecisive like I was and couldn't work out which one to put on your UCAS form, you then get to carry on studying too for the full time, and you get a lot more choice in which papers you do throughout your degree. So like last year there were some compulsory papers for people who just do history, but I didn't have to do them, only if I wanted to. So I picked something else that I was more interested in. And one of the nice things that Oxford does is that it only offers joint degrees for subjects that really complement each other well. So when you're studying like different papers, even though they're different subjects, a lot of the time they reinforce each other. So you'll be looking at something from different perspectives, but it will kind of complement and interlink, which is nice. The disadvantage, I suppose, is that it is a lot less organized, and you do have to remind your tutor sometimes, like, I'm not just doing your subject, I've got this other work as well. So you need to kind of, the onus is a bit more on you to make sure that you're taking the right papers, and just reminding your tutors that if the workload's getting a bit much, which sometimes it does, just let them know. And I think most of the time they're really understanding, so it stays manageable, but that can be problematic at times. But at the end of the day, I am really enjoying both my subjects. I wouldn't drop one. I don't regret applying for joint schools. So I would, if you're interested in 2 subjects, I would look into it.
Yeah, like I completely agree with, you know, everything Emily said. I love both subjects. I love history and I love English. So I'd say there's a lot of advantages, you know. Like the first thing people will say to you about joint honours is, oh my God, it's so much work. But there are a lot of pros to it, you know. For me, 2 out of the 7 papers, so the 7 modules that I do that comprise my degree after first year, are interdisciplinary modules. So my dissertation is 15,000 words, and it's history and English, you know. So I basically look at a historical issue or a literary issue from the perspectives of both schools, and I find that really interesting because I feel like, you know, Emily was saying that you get to see different issues from different perspectives, but what I would say is, if you look at the joint honour, if you look at the actual course structure, there is a lot of in some cases there are specific modules you can choose that kind of account for both, and I think that that's like a really good place where you can I guess you can thrive, because sometimes it can feel like, you know, you're not against, like, you're not competing against anyone. That is a big kind of problem that I sometimes find with some people in Oxford. It is like, some people see it like a competition, like Jerry, and so, you know, sometimes it can feel like, you know, you've only done 10 history essays all year, whereas the single honours students have done 20. So it means that for every essay that you do, you have to get more out of it, because by the end you have to produce work that is of the same standard as people who have done twice as many of that essay as you have, because like a history essay and an English essay are very different. So that can be quite difficult. So you have to really, I'd say, like, your weekly tutorial essays are more significant than they are for the single honours students, because you just have to get more out of them because you have so many less. But that being said, when you get to these kind of interdisciplinary papers that are only for your course, you know, for me, there's 10 history and English students, kind of like tragically nicknamed penguins, which, you know, does bring a tear to my eye every time. But yeah, so there's 10 penguins in the year, and I can't believe I just said that. I'm so sorry. And it does mean that there's kind of like a level of camaraderie that you wouldn't get in the single honours, I'd say, as much across the year. Like maybe you get that in your colleges, but for me it's quite nice because it means that I go to different colleges pretty much every week to meet different people, and I think that there being only 10 of you that are doing particularly those 2 out of the 7 papers, I find that really good and really constructive. And I think it's nice to have people there that are like-minded in that way from the different colleges. Yeah, I guess like the main disadvantage is that there's more work, you know, and sometimes it feels like there's more pressure. And I think that, like, if you are thinking about applying to joint honours, you know, don't kid yourself with thinking that it will be half and half. Like it will be more. And people kind of don't tell you that. I feel like people kind of say, you know, you'll do half what the historians do, half what the English students do, but then you also forget that then you do these extra modules. So it is more work, but I think as long as you enjoy it, you know, like Emily said, like, I don't regret it. Yeah.
And I think that's the same for most of my friends who do join schools.
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
because we're all interested in both subjects, it's worth it.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so are there many opportunities for a year abroad, and is there a lot of support offered for it?
So I think that's me again. So there are 3 main options for your year abroad. People either study in a university abroad, you can get a job, so lots of people find internships, or you can work as a teaching assistant in a school through a scheme called British Council. I am hoping to be doing, well, I will be doing British Council in my year abroad, so that's what I chose. And it's fairly straightforward, but there is quite a lot of support available. So the faculty has a database of all the internships and the accommodation and all the different things that previous students have done on their year abroad. So you can find out a bit about them, you can contact the students and find out if they enjoyed them or not. And your tutors are also really helpful. Like my tutor's sent us lots of opportunities that we might be interested in, and she's given us references. So that has been really helpful. The onus is on you to find out what you want to do, but obviously that's because it's you who's going to be spending the year abroad. They can't decide for you what you want to do. And I think it's also worth pointing out that in terms of the different opportunities there are, you don't just have to go to, like, so I'm doing French. I am going to go to France, but I could go to Quebec or Guadeloupe. Like, you can go to any country that speaks the language that you're studying. So there is like a really wide range of options for you.
Yeah. Okay, so next question is, how do the exams work in Oxford?
Am I audible this time? Can I?
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. So basically, all subjects will have slightly different arrangements. The general gist of it is that most subjects have at least 1 exam a year at some point. Most subjects have them sort of towards the end of the year. So for chemistry, I know we do it usually in the last couple of weeks of the last term. I think some subjects have slightly funkier arrangements. Law and psychology do odd stuff in the second term, I think. And yeah, as you would expect, just each exam in each year contributes a certain percentage to your overall like degree classification. So whether you get a first or a 2-1 or a 2-2. And with some subjects as well, you have other things that contribute to that, like you might have coursework for humanities, or for chemistry, we have lab work that also contributes a bit towards the final classification. The other exams you have as well are called collections, which are like basically mock exams, kind of, which all colleges and all subjects do. I think all colleges do at the start of each term, with the exception of your first ever term. You obviously don't have exams then. Collections are, yeah, as I say, like mock exams. They're different tutors and different colleges will take them sort of more or less seriously, but generally they're taken sort of moderately seriously, basically the same as mocks, as you would have done them at A-level or the equivalent. And generally you will sort of sit down with your tutor after the mocks once you've got your papers and marks back to discuss sort of what went well and go through the papers and sort of discuss whether there are any issues and what you need to be working on going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Joe pretty much covered everything that there is to say. It's worth saying, I think, just that, like, you know, all of the exams are obviously important, like help you move towards your finals and be prepared when the time comes, but there's not like a huge emphasis on, you know, how well you do, especially when you first arrive. Like, from my experience, tutors are very much aware that people will have had different levels of preparation and that sort of thing when they arrive from school, and you know, to that end, your collections all the way through to your prelims in first year are very much like about getting the job done, and you know, practicing exam technique, having all these experiences for the first time, and you know, it's they're not necessarily something to get too worked up about, although they do come with the bonus. I think that for a lot of colleges, if you do well in your prelims, there tends to be sort of rewards, whether those are like financial or non-financial, in most colleges as you then progress through the subsequent 2 years.
Okay, so next question is, what is student life like, and do you get much free time? Letitia.
Oh yeah, sorry, Zainab left. But student life, yeah, so in comparison to A-levels, I'd say the workload, I mean, it depends how hard you worked for your A-levels, but I don't think it increases too much or decreases too much. I think I would say the something that some people get easily sucked into is filling all your time with work, because you'll always have deadlines, you always have work, you always have lectures, there's always something you could do. So what works is if you fill your time with activities that you want to do. So any sport, any out of college activities, any in college activities, even things which don't really require like a society, like going on walks, going shopping, cooking, etc. So plan your day around the things you want to do, and the work will get done, is what I've always found. If you have a deadline, everyone experiences the same thing. When you first get it, you're not going to do it weeks in advance, and usually deadlines get done the day before. Like, it's no different to any other university. So yeah, there is a lot of work, and I think the difference is everybody at Oxford is quite hardworking. Like, you don't get anyone who's a natural genius and doesn't have to work for a single day in Oxford. Everyone spends a lot of time working, but having said that, it's really easy to spend all your time working, and you'd miss all the wonderful things about living in Oxford. And yeah, it's really nice spending time with your friends and things like that. So it is easy to structure your day and to spend a lot of time doing the things you like, and the workload, it will get done. And it's nice because you can work with your friends, your course mates will have the exact same amount of work as you. So yeah, it's not as hyped up as some people say it is, but there is a fair amount of work. It's not easy.
I just to add to that, one of the things that I was sort of most worried about coming to Oxford was whether I'd sort of physically be able to sit down and do all of the work that I actually have to do, because I wasn't really one at A-level. I wasn't sort of the kind of person who would sit down and like bang out hours and hours of work. I think for me, what I've found with that is that the work is generally like more interesting. So it's a lot easier to actually sit down and bang out hours and hours of work that are required. So it's definitely not as bad as I was expecting work-wise. That's just what I would stress.
Yeah, and the best bit of advice, I think, potentially the best bit of advice I've ever been given by someone at Oxford was, they said you have to sort of quite quickly get past this idea of like feeling guilty when the way it works with like the quite short terms is, as Letitia said, is that you almost always have like some deadline coming relatively soon. And I think like a lot of the people, well, everyone that goes to Oxford, I think used to doing quite well at school and having everything like under control. And to a certain extent, once you arrive, there's a lot to be said for just kind of being a bit more relaxed about things. And as Letitia says, like making a lot of space for you to just do stuff you enjoy. But I think that is helped by the fact there's a sort of camaraderie and that like everyone's in the same boat. And I think it's true what Joe said, and that I personally found there were some terms where I had quite a lot of free time if you haven't looked out extracurricular stuff and things like that to do. So it's it's probably more work than like some of your mates might be doing elsewhere, but the sort of culture and the social support systems that you have mean that it doesn't feel like a burden all the time, at least.
Okay, so is it possible to get a job whilst at Oxford?
I'll answer this first. I think I'd probably split it into maybe more than one category. Like the answer is kind of yes, but because the faculties and your colleges will offer work that kind of works around Oxford terms, like working at open days or working at kind of access events that won't take up a lot of time but do still pay quite well. And they like invite you to apply for that when deadlines come up. I did a bit of freelance kind of arts work on the side, and I found that a lot more difficult to fit around the intensity of terms at Oxford, just like commuting into like theatres in London to do work. So I wouldn't really super recommend that, I think, in hindsight. And I think for law especially, there's a lot of career pressure in first and second year to get work experience. And I think tutors don't massively like it, but they will move around tutes for you if you need to do that for career reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think like officially getting an extra, like a sort of real world job is frowned upon, and for reasonably good reasons. I think it would be quite difficult for you to fit like normal working hours in whatever sense they are around your academic commitments. However, like it's worth saying if you're stuck for money or there's some reason why you would particularly benefit from having a job, as I think is the case for for certainly some students in college. Colleges, as Annie says, like will provide in-house sort of occupations, and so like in St Hugh's, for example, students that we have working behind the bar, and it's sort of low commitment jobs that allow you to shore up your finances, and still, I think, from what I understand, allow a little bit of time for you to revise, etc. It's worth noting as well, I think, that like over the summer, this is maybe for better or worse, but being at Oxford does tend to provide you with opportunities that you might not get elsewhere. Like I think a lot of the time, if you work particularly hard or express an interest in a particular field, you can make up for that sort of lost income or lost time in getting work experience by, seeking out opportunities, during term time that you can then take advantage of over the summer, for example.
So I agree with everything that Jerry and Annie have said. I just wanted to say, like, I've helped with running interviews. I've helped with a telethon at St Hugh's, which is like a big fundraiser where you call up alumni and help them to donate to college. I've worked at open days, and I've also been like an outreach ambassador for like the modern languages faculty. So I think there are a lot of opportunities within Oxford for like quite low commitment, but yeah, like reasonably well paid jobs. And then it's like you have so much time in summer to like get a job. Like some's about 3 months long or something. So there are reasonable opportunities both within term time, when it's like if it's quite a flexible job, and outside term.
Yeah, I think that's the most important point, because like you've got to remember Oxford terms are like 8-9 weeks long. So like I've got summer jobs, Christmas jobs, Easter jobs, like there's always seasonal jobs about at home. So like if it's your worries less about work experience and more about like finances, like you will have time at some point to like try and get a job and save some money. So the next question is, what do you enjoy most about studying at Oxford?
So I feel like it would be easy to go on about this for a while, but the obvious one is the college system. It's just really nice. It means that you've got it makes, even though it's a city uni, it gives you like a little campus, and it means that you have like a common living space with people. For example, in first year, instead of living in a flat with about 6 people like a lot of my friends at other unis did, I lived on a floor with about 20 people, and even that, it's like you're just in very close proximity to everyone all the time, which is really nice, because it means even if you did no extracurricular club activities, you can still meet a lot of people, and you keep meeting them right up until you graduate pretty much. So whereas I've observed from my friends at other universities, it does seem a bit like who you live with tend to be your friends, or if you do a club, then you'll be friends with the people in that society, whereas I quite like Oxford in that it's very mixed, so you don't necessarily have those like brackets of people, and it's hard to escape in case you fall out or to make new friends. I think it's very easy to meet new people, and friendships keep changing as the years go on. And also I'd like to say, it sounds cringy, but the libraries I think are a really nice feature of Oxford. So there's a lot of libraries, I think there's like 40 something, and yeah, you don't really realise at first, but they're all in like the town centre, as well as our college has a library as well. And it just, I think it also does expand your like bubble like of where you're living. Whereas yeah, again, from my friends at other universities, I feel like they have very like strict structured days, so they'll go into their department and then they'll come home and they'll do activities and they'll come home. Whereas I think the fact that there's so many libraries around, it means really you can do what you want with your day. So you can like work wherever you want all across town. You can, you know, if you never want to leave college, you don't have to, but if you always want to be outside, you can work in different libraries, you can have lunch in town and stuff. And yeah, I just think there's a lot more space for students, and it does feel like Oxford is quite a small town, but it means you get to really enjoy all of it, and that's what I really like about Oxford.
Hi, I'm Connor. I'm a second year historian, and I'm also the JCR Careers and Academic Affairs Officer for St Hugh's. And yeah, I completely agree with what Letitia said. I was going to talk about the community feel. So how when I speak to a lot of my friends at other universities, they tend to really only have a small group of friends and they don't have any sort of interaction with other year groups. Whereas I really enjoy how, even if it's just walking through the corridors of St Hugh's or whatever, you've got wherever in college, you can just sort of see someone from any year group and you say hi, have a conversation. And I feel like there's a real sort of community feel that comes together when we have BOPs or whatever sort of college events, or just naturally in the JCR or anywhere around college. And it's just nice to have that sort of conversation, not necessarily to always be talking to the same people, to have just a real various group of people to be around. And yeah, I think that is really what makes Oxford so special.
Okay, so what's the accommodation like, and is it guaranteed for your whole course?
Yeah, so like this is one of these answers that's not going to be incredibly helpful, because it really does vary like hugely between colleges. For St Hugh's in particular, it is currently at the moment guaranteed the whole course, and what tends to happen is your accommodation will get better as you progress through the degree. So the students are in charge of running the room ballot each year, and that's done in a way that's sort of designed for older students as they progress to pick their accommodation and live with friends. And as you move towards your finals, there's opportunities for you to live in houses that are owned by college but slightly separate from the rest of campus, or in more modern accommodation with like en suites and more up-to-date facilities than you might get elsewhere. Some colleges have better accommodation than Hugh's, like some colleges have worse, but it is reasonably unusual for you to have that guarantee of accommodation on site for the 3 or 4 years your course lasts. What I would say is that the Student Union website is fantastic for this particular question. If you look them up, they have huge charts with all the information you could possibly need, and quite a lot of information you probably won't need about various standards of accommodation and facilities in different colleges. But yeah, at Hughes it's guaranteed, and on the whole, accommodation is decent, but it definitely gets better as you move towards finals.
Can I add in as well? The actual exception to the St Hugh's offering accommodation on site for the whole course is the clinical medical students. So like throughout the preclinical years and also any other degree you'd want to live in on campus, but clinical medical students are spending most of their time at the hospital, which is nowhere near college. And most colleges actually own a few houses near the hospital that you can live in if you want to.
One other thing that I think is really nice about accommodation in Oxford is it is a lot cheaper than any of my friends in any other university, because we only pay for the time that we're in Oxford. So you do have to move your stuff out, at least at St Hugh's, at the end of every term, which is a bit of a pain, but it means that it's like reasonably like well priced, and you don't pay any more for a nicer room. So by the time you get to third year, you can pick the nicest room that you can get, and you don't have to feel like, oh, but that's more expensive, so like I can't afford it. So everyone lives together, and there's no kind of expensive rooms where all the people who can afford to pay more kind of live, and then everyone else lives somewhere else, which I think is really nice. That may vary between colleges, but definitely at St Hugh's that's the case.
Okay, so the next question is, how much cross-faculty and inter-college mixing is there? So this is another question where it like will really vary. Like everyone said, like due to the college system, it means that you are living with like so many different people. So you'll live with people who don't necessarily do your course. So the cross-faculty mixing in that sense is like a lot that, you know, you meet people from all different courses and things like that. In terms of inter-college mixing, depending on your subject, like if you do a smaller subject, you'll probably mix with other colleges more because you'll take modules in other colleges and meet other people. Whereas if you have a subject where there's quite a lot of people in your college doing it and you pick a lot of core modules, you will stay in college. But also there's so many different opportunities, which we'll come on to in a bit, but you can sort of, if you want to mix with a lot of people from other colleges, you can. And if you don't want to, you don't have to. Like there's societies within Hughes, so you can stay within your college, but there's also like societies that are across the whole university, so you can meet as many different people as you want. Yeah. The next question is, what extracurricular activities and societies are there? So, Annie, do you want to?
Yeah. I run the Poetry Society at Oxford, but I also sit on the board of one of our student newspapers and magazines that's called, they're both called like Showell, and the other one's called ISIS. And student journalism is quite big, though from my position it probably just seems quite big at Oxford. And a lot of people who've gone on to work in journalism have worked on Showell and ISIS in the past. So if you're interested in journalism, it's a really good place to get started, and we're trying to improve access and get more people in from state schools, definitely. And because I think in the past it's been quite private school dominated, and I think it's getting a lot better in that regard. There's a lot of work left to do, but I think we're slowly improving. And with Poetry Society, I think the university societies really like help you to mix cross faculty and with other colleges as well. I've been to a lot of English faculty events with Poetry Society, and it's just been really nice. So I'd encourage you to get involved.
Yeah, so apart from like journalism, which is massive, there are also lots of different societies for like each subject. So there's like the debating societies that you get. So like the Oxford Union is a massive one, but that's quite pricey. But then there are also free alternatives, like for example the PPE Society puts on lots of talks and they're all free to attend. The History Society, you pay like a small fee, but I think it's like £15, and they also put on quite a few talks. So there's lots of debating stuff if you want to get involved in that, or like at least speaker events. But then another aspect of like extracurricular stuff is volunteering. There's lots of that to do if you're interested. So for example, like spending time with elderly people, or volunteering in schools, or helping with access initiatives around the university. So there's like a massive variety of things to get involved in, which is nice. And you also get to meet new people by doing that. And then also all the sports societies too. I'm not very well versed, so I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that, but they're like a massive thing as well.
Yeah, I think sport tends to be, I was actually sort of pleasantly surprised when I arrived, because I obviously expected, you know, the sort of stereotype of it being sort of loads of bookish people that turned up. And I'm not going to say that like the quality of sport is fantastic, but there's certainly, opportunities to play pretty much whatever sport you like. I mean, there tends to be multiple teams for the more popular sports like, the football and rugby and rowing, all have different teams for different skill levels to make sure it's as inclusive as possible. And they all happen in college with like regular competitions and stuff like that. And then for more niche sports, there are university-wide clubs for, practically everything. There's freshers fairs where, people just set up stalls and you can go and, explore or get involved in different sports. And you're talking like hundreds of different sports, most of which I hadn't heard of before. But, there really is like something for everyone from the point of view of like keeping active.
Also, the other thing is, I think you need like 5 people, but like pretty much anyone can start a new society. Like if you join and there's a sport, which I can't think of a sport they don't offer, but if there is a really niche sport that you really enjoy, as long as you can get like a handful of other people, you will be able to create that society. So there's literally like so many different opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a boy at Hughes was looking into starting like a Gaelic football team, and I think there are, like genuinely just enough people in Oxford that play Gaelic football to actually have a Gaelic football team, but like still the university was keen for them to like play varsity matches against Cambridge and like represent the uni and that sort of thing. So yeah, like there are really very few barriers to entry for whatever sort of sport that you're interested in.
And then sort of similar, the next question is the social life accepting of less outgoing people?
Yeah, and I guess this is a bit of a tough one to answer because it sort of it depends what you're looking for as a less outgoing person. There's certainly a wide variety of people at Oxford, as you can probably imagine, and it probably doesn't come as a surprise to know that like quite a lot of the people in college and in the university generally aren't your sort of stereotypically outgoing people, and that's fine. Like I think there tends to be quite a lot of respect, at least speaking for within Hughes, for people's sort of privacy and their right to do whatever they want with their free time. And there's definitely isn't a stigma attached to people that clubbing or huge events aren't their thing, or for even people who are just not as confident when it comes to engaging with social activities. I mean, it's clear that making that jump to university can be difficult, and we try and set up Freshers Week, for example. I guess Claudia will maybe be able to give more info on this, but we try and set up Freshers Week and events that run throughout the year in a way that makes it easier for people who are less naturally confident or outgoing to make friends. And I mean, Claudia will be able to give more detail, but we try and run like wholesome, informal events for people who aren't, necessarily like alcohol centric, or for whom the sort of stereotypical like basic social events aren't really their thing. And it's also worth saying that there's lots of both university and student initiatives that are designed to help people if you ever end up feeling like isolated or like you're not really fitting in. We have like an excellent welfare team and loads of peer supporters who are trained to like have conversations with people and try and reassure anyone who for whatever reason isn't feeling like they're really integrating easily with like the larger social group. And thankfully those incidences are few and far between, because we try to have like an inclusive calendar of social events that caters for everyone. But the support is there if anything like that happens.
Yeah, so just to sort of expand on what Gerard was saying, so I'm an ENTS rep, and ENTS is short for like entertainment. So I'm meant to entertain people along with the other ENTS rep throughout term. And so what we do is we put on BOPs, which are like big parties. But apart from that, we also have weekly events which are meant to be sort of more low key. So for example, we've run board games nights, film nights, trying to think of something else, like pub quizzes. So they're very like low commitment. We recognise that lots of people either don't drink at all or they don't want to drink all the time, or they don't want to drink lots. So we try to put on events that you can sort of pop in and out of, just to lift your spirits up. The welfare team also put on lots of really, really nice events. So for example, like welfare tea, which is where they have a table and they just lay out snacks and tea, and people just sort of have a little chat, and they're very, very low commitment, no pressure at all to do anything, not even to come, and like that's fine. Yeah, so we try and like be as inclusive as possible in all the events that we run.
I'd say as well, having the whole college system definitely takes some of the focus off of the whole sort of clubbing scene that relative to other unis, I'd say, like I managed to go like the whole of last term without stepping foot in a club, and I still had like a fine time socially. Having that college sort of system, there's always sort of something going on like relatively near that you can either like decide to get involved in or just sort of stumble upon. It certainly, if you're not into clubbing that much, definitely doesn't mean that you're at any of a sort of disadvantage in terms of making friends or having a good time like socially.
Okay, so someone asked whether there was a divide between those who came from state schools versus private.
I mean, so I can obviously only answer like one way here, but certainly like not in my experience has there been any real animosity. Like, I guess it's important to say that in Freshers Week you'll maybe get like odd like strange comment or something like that, but a lot of that is because people are being exposed to others from different lifestyles for the first time, and that's something that goes both ways. I think certainly there's no, or in my experience there's been like no prolonged tension or issues between state school kids and private school kids, certainly not socially. And I think Asha mentioned this before, like I genuinely would struggle to tell you who was who now 2 years down the line, and it really just does become an irrelevance other than maybe slightly changing the anecdotes that you can tell during Freshers. It is worth noting, I think, that like academically, any divide that there is disappears quite quickly, but tutors do go out of their way, I think, to provide extra support and resources for people who feel like they're at a disadvantage when they arrive. So that socially there's definitely no difference, and academically I think there's lots of good support networks and stuff like that to make sure that anyone who's maybe not been subject to the same standard of education is brought up to speed really quickly. And looking at the admissions data that Claudia spoke about earlier, tends to be the case that between 50 and 65% of people at colleges are coming from state schools, which is obviously not perfect and it's not proportional to the population as a whole, but it certainly means that there's a lot more state school kids at Oxford than I had expected there to be, where I had in my head some sort of paradise for elites, and that's certainly not the case. So no, unless there are private school students who feel like they're being subject to aggression or something like that, it's certainly not the other way around.
Okay, so what is the support that is offered like in terms of both pastoral and financial?
Hello, so me again. So what I would say is I remember when I was looking to go to Oxford and sort of in that sort of pre-application process, and I remember going on a fees and funding part of or page under Oxford and seeing sort of estimated costs. And just at first glance, I was really sort of worried and quite anxious about it, that even with maintenance loans from Student Finance England or wherever, that I wasn't going to be able to meet the necessary costs. And it was quite a worry at the start. But then the more I looked into it, and from the experience I've had now of 2 years at Oxford, it's there's a lot more support there than what there might seem just at like hearing myths or looking at the website at first glance. What I would particularly point people to is towards the scholarships and bursaries tab within the University of Oxford website, and highlight a few things from it. So like the Crank Start Scholarship which Claudia mentioned earlier. It's for anyone with a household income of 27,500 or less. It's really helpful in terms of it provides financial support in reducing tuition fees down to £6,000. It provides a bursary of up to, I think it's around £4,000. And there's also that financial support isn't just for those that are, say, at the lowest end of the spectrum. The bursaries extend all the way up to £42,000 a year household income. So that means that you may think you're not entitled to some bursary, but it automatically will come if your household income meets the criteria. And also within that support, there's a Crank Start internship program, which helps students or Crank Start scholars sort of lay the groundwork for future careers and provide support in application processes. And also there's other funding such as the Oxford Travel Supplement for UK bursary holders, which means that sometimes, particularly those having to travel quite far, there's obviously a lot of cost that comes with that, with train tickets or bus tickets or whatever it may be. And Oxford recognise that. And so there's funding available to those that need it, who are bursary holders. They can just let them know, and there's grants that are given and to support those costs. There's also other forms of scholarship, which is definitely worth checking out. You may think that your area doesn't have scholarships or whatever, but I would definitely check the website that I said. I found one on there and it was suitable for me, and it will tell you all the criteria and if you're eligible to apply. And I would definitely suggest it's worth applying. I went into it with an attitude of, you know what, I don't expect anything. It's the same attitude I went into with an Oxford application. And you've got nothing to lose though, and a lot to gain. And a lot of them can have some great financial support and pastoral support that comes with it. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of support out there financially.
Yeah, I think it's worth adding that once you're at Oxford, even if you're not on a bursary or have a scholarship, if you do encounter any unforeseen financial difficulties, then all colleges, and I'm pretty sure the university, like as a whole as well, has like hardship funds where there is like a pot of money where if you need the support whilst you're there, they will provide that for you, whether that's to like buy subfusk or like, you know, get new materials, just things like that. Like they will cover it. Or if you need to stay during the VAT and you need to pay like for your accommodation, like they will cover that. And then in terms of pastoral, there's literally so much support on offer. Like the college has welfare reps, as we've already said, who like organise events, who like to focus on like positive mental health, things like that. We also have like peer supporters who are trained to deal with any concerns you have and just be there to like listen and support you. And then if you prefer to, like if it's slightly more serious pastoral issues and you prefer to not speak to a student about it, I'm pretty sure all colleges, St Hugh's definitely does, has a college counsellor, and they're available for weekly sessions. And also the uni-wide counselling service is so good and completely free. So like I emailed and literally got an appointment the week after, and like you don't even have to go in person, like you can do them over the phone and stuff like that, and it's all completely free, so that's really good. And then in terms of like academic support, obviously it will vary, but all your tutors will be so supportive and helpful, and you'll be assigned a personal tutor who you can go to with like any pastoral concerns or like academic concerns and things like that. And yeah, like you'll also have a meeting with your principal every so often. So like there's so many different people where if you have concerns, whether that's personal or academic, you can raise them. We also have elected undergraduate like representatives who are there to like offer welfare support for everyone, but also specific minority groups. So we have like a socio-economic and access rep, a BAME rep, LGBTQ plus rep, and disabilities rep. So like there's so many different people to talk to, and also the student union, which is like separate from the university but like uni-wide at the same time, has so many different initiatives and people to speak to. Like yeah, the support's really good once you're here. The next question was, what is the level of diversity like in Oxford?
Meeting. I think if you read the latest access report, like it is improving. There are like year on year like more BAME students at Oxford. I think to say that the situation is where we'd like it to be at is probably incorrect. There's always more to do, and Oxford doesn't have anything like the kind of diversity of some American universities or some London universities where maybe half the student population is BAME. But the uni like really takes it fairly seriously, and I think the SU has a BAME campaign. There's lots of BAME networks in the university, both formal and informal kind of grassroots stuff like Common Ground and Uncomfortable Oxford, though that kind of ties in with decolonisation stuff a bit more. And I think you will definitely find your group of people here.
Yeah, there was a more specific question which Zainab was supposed to answer, but someone asked whether can I choose to live with a certain group of people? For example, living with other Muslims might be ideal for a Muslim as we follow a different strict way of life that others may not necessarily be aware of. So in terms of like choosing who to live with, in your first year you won't get a choice. That you can get in contact with the college if you've got an offer, if you have like extenuating circumstances, and if that's really, really important to you, depending on the college, they may be able to provide a specific room for you. But then in terms of the other years, if you feel like that's what you'd want to do, live with other people who follow your way of life, then you can do that. It's completely up to you. But I would say that like we do have the student union has all the different faith societies, and they all run events and things like that, and it is very inclusive, and like people are very, very respectful. We have a multi-faith room, chapels and things like that, so there are things available to you if you like require them and things like that.
I will just say sorry. I just asked Zainab about it. She sent me a voice message, so I don't know if I can like play it out loud. Like,
yeah, sure.
If it works.
Yeah, no, I get you. Wait, I don't know if I'm too late to answer your question, but basically, I was just going to say that. Sorry, I just got distracted. I was going to say that you can obviously choose who you want to be with in like later years, as in like, so you could talk about balloting, and if you have a particular like group of friends that you want to stay with, and they so happen to be of a particular religious faith, and you know, there's nothing stopping you staying with them. For me personally, obviously, like in first year, you can't pick where you stay, but one of the like Muslim girls in the year above me, or a couple of years above me, she kind of mentioned how like for praying you have to like basically like perform like ablution, which is basically like washing your hands, face and stuff, etc., and that would be a lot harder if you didn't have your own sink especially, or like toilet. So then I got into contact with Magdalena, apparently it's pronounced Magdalena, and basically like said, oh, is there any chance that I could get like a room with a sink because blah blah blah.
Is that too loud? I'll play the rest.
That's fine.
I don't know how much this cost. So yeah, so I basically got moved from Maine to Kenyan because I had said to her that like it will like, I mean, it wouldn't be impossible, but it'd be harder for me to like pray and stuff like that if I was living in Maine, and they were quite like accommodating of that. So you could say it like that, like you could say that they're quite like lenient, but with regards to like picking to be with Muslims, I don't think that's possible, because obviously like if you're in a group of friends that are all Muslims, like that's great, you can stay together, but you can't like pick people of certain religions to stay together with you, if that makes sense. Yeah, I kind of wanted to answer that question because obviously like nobody else could really answer it. But yeah, feel free to just be like, oh, one of my like Muslim friends said this, blah blah blah, or whatever.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of what you're saying, Asha. And then Rebecca, who's also Muslim but she's not practicing, said that if obviously you can't choose where you live in first year, but if it doesn't bother you to live with people who drink, it's very easy to avoid, you know, drinking and prees and stuff like that. But if you mind, I mean, you can ask, there's welfare rooms, and you can also ask to move, and then yeah, in your second year you get to choose who you get to live with.
Can I also add, so I have a friend that's at a different college actually, where he's got dietary requirements because he's a religious Jew, and they literally found him a room with like his own kitchen just by himself. Like colleges are as accommodating as they can be. and they'll always try to do the best they can with it.
Okay, so that's all the more general questions. We have some subject-specific ones. So if we start with economics, someone asked whether you have any wider reading recommendations for E&M, which is economics and management, obviously.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Richard. I'm doing economics and management, just finished my second year. And in terms of like wider reading for, I presume, to put down in your personal statement, I would say don't, focus entirely on the kind of surface level, very entry level economics books that everyone might read, because economics and management is such a competitive course. So, I mean, lots of people read free economics, and that is fine. And it's like a good way to get into economics and, learn some of the broader area around economics. But I would say try to read, if to put in your personal statement, try to read something that's maybe a bit more in depth. So maybe I read a book called Capital by Thomas Piketty. It's like a more academic-y economics book. And then the other thing I would say is that most of the tutors will understand that if you're applying for economics and management, chances are you'll be applying for straight economics elsewhere. So they won't expect you to have anything to do with management in your personal statement, but I would say it's like another thing that would make you stand out compared to the crowd, is to read some kind of management based book. So one I would recommend would be Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rumelt. But obviously, if you want to contact me with any more like recommended readings and so on, I'm obviously happy to help out with that. But I would just say like the most important thing is not actually what you read, it's more how you address what you read. It's more how you would talk about in your personal statement, talk about critically the book that you've read, or if it came up in interviews, what you actually thought about that. I think that's more important than the actual content of what you're reading. It's what you make from what you read. But obviously it is important to have some good books in your personal statement for economics management.
Okay, so the next question is kind of similar. How much extra reading is expected from economics students? So obviously, as Richard was talking about for the E&M personal statement, but then in terms of PPE, so like, because you're also doing philosophy and politics, you've not got much room in your personal statement to talk about economics. And I didn't read any like really academic economics literature. I sort of read about the financial crash and like what had caused it and like the solutions and like what they put in place and stuff like that, just so that I had some real world like economics information that like I could talk about and that I was like semi interested in for the interviews. So like we're kind of like, it'd be perfect to read about the impact of coronavirus on the economy and stuff like that. Like I don't think you need to worry about, I mean, it's slightly different from E&M, but like because you don't have to have studied economics to do PPE, like if you just show an interest, like you don't need to come in with like all the economic concepts like worked out and stuff like that. And then in terms of like when you're actually there, I'm not sure if that's what the question's asking. Like the extra reading that you're given for economics is like textbook reading mainly. Like you're not expected, like you obviously can, but you're not expected to go and read all these like huge economics papers. Like they are very difficult. So a lot of the extra reading is just textbooks in order for you to like further solidify your knowledge on these economic concepts and apply them to different scenarios. Like obviously if you do PPE, most of your extra reading will be about philosophy or politics rather than economics. I don't know if you've got anything to add.
Just to add to that, it's like the same for E&M. You do very little like during the actual course, like outside reading of economics. It's mostly learning content from lectures and doing problem sheets. And most of your actual reading will be on the management side, as is the same with the politics and philosophy on the PPE side.
So the final E&M question is, why did you choose to study E&M Oxford over other universities, given that it is the most competitive course?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd say it's probably the same reason that pretty much everyone applies for whichever subject they go for, which is that they just find it interesting, they just enjoy it. So for me, like, I'm not sure if the question is specifically why economics and management as opposed to economics, but I was also interested in the more business side of things as opposed to just the the sort of macroeconomic side of it. But then in terms of it being such a competitive course, like I think it's the same as most courses in that you probably would be best going into it as an aspiration rather than some kind of expectation. Like it is very difficult, but every course at Oxford is very difficult. So I wouldn't want that to deter someone from applying because I didn't expect to get in and I did. So like I would, if anything, for me, it actually made it more comforting in the interview because I just had no expectation of going in. I just didn't expect to get in. And so the interviews were then more relaxed because it was just very much an aspiration for me. So I wouldn't want that to deter anyone from applying for E&M to see the low offer rates. Just apply if you're interested in economics management. Apply for economics management.
I think that's kind of applicable to like all subjects as well, because when you go on the information page on the website, like the percentage of people who apply that get in can be really daunting because it is often very low. So like, don't let that be the reason that you don't put in an application. Definitely.
You have like 5 choices on your UCAS form. You're not going to lose out by putting Oxford down. Like, it's not putting it down means that you can't apply anywhere else. You've still got other options. So I definitely say go for it, because if you don't apply, then you're definitely not going to get it.
Okay, so now we have some biochemistry questions. Someone asked, am I disadvantaged when applying if I've only studied sciences and not maths at A-level?
Well, I would check the requirements, but unless they've changed, you just need chemistry. So in applying, you're not disadvantaged at all. They're not going to look at your A-level subjects and see that you haven't, and choose someone who's done maths over you because you chose to study like a language instead. Like, you can't do that. But so it has no impact on your application at all. When you get here, the difference is if you have or haven't done maths at A-level is that, so we do in first year, there's like they kind of cover all the maths that you'd need to know. But the difference is if you've done maths at A-level, it's easy because it's essentially just A-level maths. So a lot of people will like not go to maths lectures, not go to the maths classes because it's easy. But if you haven't done maths at A-level, those will be really useful for you. So if you just treat them like you would any other lecture, like learn it, work at it, like you do, like, split your work evenly. Whereas if you had done maths, you might spend a bit less time studying maths in first year. Then you won't be disadvantaged by the time you get to second year. I think it's the case in a lot of subjects that first year is meant to be like quite broad because everyone has like a different like level of education in school. So first year is kind of just there to like make sure everyone's at the same level of like basic knowledge. So you're not disadvantaged in your application, and the course is structured in a way that you won't be disadvantaged after your first year.
Yeah, I mean, I know I didn't do science, but it was the same for PPE. So it was 3 PPS or did, like, we chose to do like a little booster maths course. Like if you hadn't done further maths, just to make sure like you're up to scratch for economics. So I don't know whether they do that for most subjects, but it kind of seems like it. So you're not, if it's not a required subject, then honestly don't worry about it.
Yeah, can I just chip in as well, because there's like basically the same question that often gets asked with medicine about not doing biology or not doing physics or not doing maths, and the only subject you have to do is chemistry, and the others by the end of first year you'll be the same as everyone else. There's just a bit more work you have to do in first year to be up to scratch, and that's the only difference.
So someone asked, what topics do you study in biochemistry and how much choice do you get?
So you don't get any choice ever really, apart from you can choose to do extra. So in second year, I think you get to choose to do an extra supplementary exam if you want to. So it's actually quite popular, surprisingly. So you get the choice of doing like extra chemistry or like more like pharmacology based stuff. And I don't know if Joe wants to chip in as well, because I think it's similar for chemistry, but you don't get choice. However, I do want to say that I don't know, I think it's kind of different to humanities, where like if you study a topic in history which you hate, that's kind of bad. Whereas in science, it's like you do kind of need to know a lot like of the general stuff, and you're always going to get like whatever uni you go to, you're always going to get a topic in science which you don't like. But for example, if there's something very specific you want to do, then potentially I would consider applying for like a natural sciences course at another university like Cambridge or Durham, or any of them that offer natural sciences, because then you'd get a lot more choice. But I will say that having the choice isn't like always as amazing as you think it would be in terms of science.
Did you have anything to add, Hugh? No.
Just very much the same for chemistry. There's not much choice at all. In the second year, you similar with biochemistry, you do like you have the options to do a supplementary module. In chemistry, there's sort of the incentive to do that, but you get a few hours knocked off of your lab requirement. Which, so if you're not such a fan of labs, it might be a good idea to do a supplementary subject so that you can do a few hours of that. But yeah, not generally in STEM subjects. I think there's not very much choice. I think the assumption sort of is that you're supposed to be sort of very passionate about the subject that you've applied for, so you're mainly going to spend your time doing that pure subject. Apart from the sort of, there are some built-in core modules that sort of go into other areas. So for example, for chemistry, we have like at least one biochemistry module every sort of year, I think. But in terms of choice, yeah, not very much.
Sorry, I realised I didn't actually answer what topics do you study, which is actually kind of a big thing, because I was a bit worried about this. I didn't really know what biochemistry was before applying. So it's basically like chemistry, but that's applied to like real life things. So you will study proteins a lot, which you don't really know much about before coming into it, but they are a lot more interesting than you'd think, which sounds surprising. But so most people will go in thinking that they love genetics and genetic modification and all of this stuff. But actually, yeah, it is a kind of, it's very niche, but it is very interesting. So it's a lot more physical and chemical than you'd think. So the topics you study is like human metabolism, you do genetics, you do like molecular stuff. So it's all very, very small. So you talk about like proteins which work for like replicating DNA, how this processes inside the cell works to a very molecular level. And then also a lot of it is about like structural stuff. So like the structure of proteins, the structure of other like small things inside of cells. So I think my advice would be go on the Oxford Biochemistry website and have a look. You can like literally click to see like where the students would find their work. You can click and see the different topics, and it gives you like a summary of each topic. So yeah, I would do that and then make sure that you find it kind of interesting.
And then finally, what extracurricular activities would make my application stand out?
So this is kind of hard, because obviously if you're talking about literally making it stand out, first of all, I would just say do what you enjoy doing, because Oxford aren't too bothered about like, you know, they're not going to take you if you're like specifically a musician over like an athlete or whatever. But if you want to do things to make your application stand out, I think in terms of STEM, it's important to show that you're interested in like current research. So for example, some schools offer like an extended research project type thing, like an EPQ, and that was, I think, really was useful in my interview, because they asked about it, and it meant that I'd done this research and I showed them that I was interested and passionate about it, and I genuinely think that was like really helpful in the interview and in my application. But if your school doesn't offer that, there's nothing to say that you can't kind of do your own kind of research. So for example, if there's something that you really like, or if you've seen on the news something interesting to do with science, like read into it, look it up. You could even like make your own project and like send it, or like write an essay and send it to your teachers, or like I don't know, tell your friends about it. But yeah, I think you have to be careful with reading, because everyone will have put a book on their personal statement, and a lot of the time you don't really get that much from it. So I think it's much more important to prioritize work experience first of all, and it's hard to get work experience in a lab, so anything to do with science that you can get is good. So like I would just email all your local hospitals and try and get work experience shadowing someone in a hospital. Like no matter what science you want to go into, it's easy to like link it to what science you want to do. So work experience is like the best thing you can do. And then like podcasts, research, documentaries, like anything like that, and then like books as well if you're like stuck for things to do. But yeah, there's nothing particularly for extracurriculars, unless you're like head of your school's science club or something. Like, I guess that would be useful as well.
Okay, so now we've got a couple of law questions. So someone asked how much of the examinations is coursework and how much is written exams?
Yeah, so the law exams are split into kind of two sections. You've got first year exams, which are called mods, which will sit in second term of first year. And then the rest of your degree is called final honours school, and that is what makes up your degree classification, whether you get a first or a 2-1 or a 2-2 or whatever. And first year doesn't count in that sense, but they are still important grades if you're applying to internships, etc. In first year, it's entirely exam based, so you will sit three 3-hour-long exams, and that'll make up 100% of your grade, and that's law mods. And in final honours school, you'll sit, I think it's 8 exams. 6 of those are compulsory, and 2 of them are optional. Ones that you do in, wait, no, I think it's 9. It's 9. I'm kidding myself. I need to sit fewer than I have to. Yeah, and half of one of those papers is coursework, so we have to study philosophy of law at Oxford. It's why our degree is called jurisprudence, which is exciting, and you get to do an extended project. So my project's on feminism and sex work and the law, and that'll make up half of your jurisprudence paper. But other than that, you can't really do coursework. In third year, they're toying with a dissertation option, but they've not put that in place yet. So yeah, it will mostly be exams, unfortunately, but we do sit fewer exams per year in Cambridge, so that might factor into your decision.
And then finally, how many tutorials or seminars do you receive for law every term?
We have 1.5 essays per week, which doesn't make that much sense, but we alternate between having 1 tutorial a week and 2 tutorials a week normally. Sometimes tutors will have to move things around, so you might end up with 3 tutorials in a week, which is not as fun, but we will get through it, and that averages out to about 12 tutorials a term.
Okay, so now I just have a few medicine questions. So we'll be hearing from Jacob a lot. So someone asked, is extra reading necessary for a medicine application? And do you have any book recommendations?
Yeah, so apologies. You are going to be hearing my voice a lot. But extra reading is not like a necessity in any real sense. There's no requirement for it. But you're not going to get into Oxford unless you have a genuine interest in medicine or whatever subject. So obviously, extra reading can never hurt. In terms of actual, like, whether to write about books or not, like, everyone I knew applying to medicine wrote about the books they'd read. I didn't, because I hadn't read any books. So instead, I said that I'd read a little bit about certain topics. So I had just mentioned that I'd read a bit about neurodegenerative disorders, things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And then, because I found it interesting, but then when just before my interviews, I went and I looked into them and I read them a little bit. And it meant that there was something to ask me about that I could, prove my knowledge of, and obviously don't write about something if you can't prove your knowledge about it. But it helped. I thought it was actually better the way I did it in hindsight than other people, because trust me, they've read 1,000 personal statements that include the book that you've said you've read, and it's just boring to them. And okay, if you've read it, there's no point putting it there. If you've read it, there's no harm putting it there. But you're actually a more interesting candidate, I think, if you speak about like a topic and then you can show that you're interested in that rather than just a book. That said, if you do actually want book recommendations, I'm happy for people to be in touch with me. But just quickly, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat is a great book. All of Atul Gawande's books are great. And Oxford's Very Short Introduction to Medical Ethics or Philosophy of Science are both good as well.
Okay, so as the modules are very similar at most universities, why did you choose to study medicine at Oxford? This is kind of similar to what we've already had, but...
Yeah, so it's, again, similar to science, but even more so for medicine. Like, you can't just be having doctors that don't, know about everything about medicine as you could with a humanity. You need to have that basic level of understandings, but it is worth knowing that although over the course of your degree, you're going to be learning the same stuff as everyone else, how you learn it and when you learn it differs. So for instance, I might be learning something in first year that someone else might be learning in fifth year, and the other way around at different uni. And in terms of how you learn things, that's one of the things that drew me to Oxford especially, so the tutorial system. And then with other unis, PBL versus traditional courses, you should try and get an idea of what suits you and also what you're going to find interesting, and that should affect where you want to apply, because although the content doesn't necessarily differ, how you come across it will.
What is the workload like for medicine?
So workload is a lot. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Medicine's more than most courses at most unis, and same applies at Oxford, but it's not like incomparable. Like I went through my timetable from term to like find this information. It's like 8 to 12 lectures a week, a couple of practicals, which can be anything from 1 hour to longer, occasionally most of the day, and then also an anatomy session every week, which will be an hour and a half. And then there's also your tutorials. So for first and second year, that's 3 a week. It is a lot. And also there's the essays with tutorials as well. It is a lot, but it's not unmanageable. And if you are struggling, there is help to be had.
How is the course structured and how much is practical work?
So the overall degree is 6 years, 3 years preclinical and 3 years clinical. That's first 3, second 3. That's not to say that there is no clinical in the first 3 years and only clinical in the last 3. It's just the main emphasis is on one or the other. So then in your first 2 years, your assessments are split up into 3 main topics. And then you'll be learning little things within each topic. And also the topics will overlap. So like in first year, I'm assessed in organisation of the body, and I'm assessed in physiology, but then I could learn about the lungs, and that could, or the heart, or the kidneys, or whatever, and that could fit into either. And there will be stuff that overlaps between the two, but there'll also be stuff about the kidneys that's specific to organisation, and the stuff about the kidneys that's specific to physiology. So your assessment is split up into those 3 in first 2 years. In third year, it's different. There's a significant part of your assessment that's done on a research project, and that is the first time you actually ever get to choose anything in the degree. Because obviously there's like a huge range of things you can do. I think someone in the year above wants to do something in public health, and then there are other people that want to do really niche biochemistry things. Like there's just a massive range. In terms of practicals, that in third year, again, depending on your research project, you may be doing more or less practical, but in first 2 years, it's just pass fail. It doesn't contribute to your degree in a real way, like Joe was saying it does with chemistry. You're not going to fail practicals unless you don't show up. And they do help, and they are interesting. So obviously you will show, but they're just pass fail.
And the final question, what are tutors looking for in regards to work experience for medicine?
Yeah, so the tutors know that different people, depending on their background, have different. We actually asked, wasn't me, but I was in the room, like a couple of weeks into starting at St Hugh's, what they'd thought about work experience and how they viewed it. And the tutors at St Hugh's actually said they barely even take it into account. They know the people come from different backgrounds, and they barely take it into account. Obviously, we'll take that with a pinch of salt, because that's the medicine tutors at St Hugh's, which is not the same as every medicine tutor at college, at the uni, not the same as every tutor at St Hugh's, and it's not the same as, and Oxford isn't going to look at things the same as every other uni. But it is true that they take into account, and I wouldn't worry about that. But as I said, with the reading, again, showing interest is always a good thing, and you're not going to get in unless you are interested. And work experience is a great way of showing that if you can. Ultimately, when they get an applicant and they look at their work experience, they don't really care what the work experience is. What they care is that overall about an applicant is that they can show they genuinely care about the subject, and that they're ready for that degree, and they're going to make it the whole way through. And for medicine, they're going to be a good doctor. So if you can show that with your work experience or any elsewhere, you should try your best. And that's how I would look at how to talk about your work experience, is with a view to showing them that you have those attributes. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, so that's our last question. So like, I hope you all found this helpful. And as I said, like, if you want any more information, obviously all the information about how to apply and the structure of all the courses is on the Oxford University website. But if you go on the St Hugh's JCL website, there are some tips from current students, and also they have all the JCL committee's email addresses if you have any questions for them. And yeah, their virtual open days are 1st and 2nd of July and 1 in September. But yeah, I hope you learned something. And like, I think the most important thing to take away is just that, like, if you're sat there thinking Oxford isn't for me, like, that's probably not true. Like, Oxford is for everyone if you've got the grades, like, and that's fine. So yeah, anyone got anything else to say?